a short-term win isn't necessarily a long-term gain. And I think if we let ourselves in politics become so much against the other side, we are losing the unification of our country.
This episode, setting kids up for success and how to move forward in an increasingly divided climate. I'm Daniel Lance, along with co-host Paul Gilman, and from Paul's Basement Studios, this is Pod So One. Sarah Wall has a more diverse career than most millennials out there. From Democratic campaigns to Republican campaigns, from political think tanks to the food service industry, and from nonprofits to a global financial company. We catch Sarah mid-journey, and she shares some wisdom from her breadth of experience, including her thoughts on the nonprofit world versus the corporate world, what she wishes was different about Baltimore, and the roundabout path she took to finding her political stance. Here's Sarah Wall. So Sarah Wall, you have one of the biggest hearts of anybody that I know, and I think that manifested itself when you went to go and start your career, because you worked for, I think, government research agencies and service industry, and you eventually landed at a nonprofit in Baltimore. Tell us about Baltimore. Well, tell us about the nonprofit and what it did.
Yeah, sure. So I worked for a really small nonprofit when I lived in Baltimore. I actually was living in DC when I applied for the job. I really wanted to move to Baltimore. I don't know why. Like, I guess I was really under the impression that Baltimore was like a very cool, like hipstery city, which is kind of true. Like, there's like bikes and stuff, and there's a lot of like vegan food, but it's like,
yeah, baby,
not nearly as like hipstery as Richmond, Virginia, which is what I thought it would be like. It was not. So anyway, I applied for this job. And I think the reason I applied for it was I really wanted to work at a small nonprofit, and the job that I applied for was as a field organizer. And I was happiest when I was a field organizer on a campaign when I was 21. Like, I really wanted to get back into sort of more of a political, like, place, more of a political vibe. Because at the time I was just working for a small business. So I applied for the job. The nonprofit was working on youth advocacy. So we were trying to teach young people in Baltimore at Baltimore City high schools to advocate for themselves, mostly politically. We were working both at the city level in Baltimore City and at the state level in Annapolis. So my specific role was actually working with young people who'd been involved in the criminal justice system and teaching them to advocate for themselves at the state level in Maryland. So we were trying to change laws around juvenile justice, around young people being charged as adults in Maryland. And training up these young people who had been through those experiences to, advocate for change on behalf of themselves and also for other young people who, were involved in the criminal justice system.
What does advocating for themselves look like?
So we were working on in a political sense. Like, of course, you can advocate for yourself in any sense, but we were working on it politically. So I'll talk about, what we did. We trained these young people to, in public speaking, in meeting with legislators, in professionalism. Because, when you're talking about young people who've been involved in the criminal justice system in Baltimore City, like, you're not starting from a level where they've ever really had to be professional, where they've ever had to really put on a nice suit, like these young people. So like, not only were we teaching them to advocate for themselves, to legislators, talking about criminal justice reform and what it would mean to them, to political leaders, we were also teaching them life skills, like owning a suit, like showing up to work on time, like just basic things that for a lot of these young people, they had really never been taught that before. So it was a really eye-opening experience for me because I grew up in Virginia Beach. I went to William & Mary. Like, I lived in a very kind of a small world, in terms of like worldliness. So it was really eye-opening for me to like live in, inner city Baltimore and be working with young people that had literally never owned a suit before. And being able to bring those young people to Annapolis and like have them meet with Maryland state legislators about the bills and the pieces of legislation that we were working on was huge. I mean, it was a huge honor. Like, it was just a really important part, I think, of my professional development, of my development even as just as a person. I really feel like I grew a lot from working with those kids.
So your day-to-day involvement was, it seems like you touched a lot of different areas. We were working with kids directly and also working with policy and working with legislators to try to change things. And one of the things that you and I spoke about a lot when you were working there was that you were specifically trying to get youths to not be tried as youths. No, sorry. You were trying to get youths to not be tried as adults, but as youths instead. What does that mean from like a legal sense?
Yeah, so if we kind of just dig in a little bit into Maryland criminal law for young people specifically. So young people, when they are charged with any one of 33 offenses, they are automatically considered adults in the eyes of the law. So I think they can be charged as adults as young as 14. So those would be for like the big offenses like rape, first-degree murder, first-degree sexual offense. But for 16 and 17-year-olds, they could be tried as adults for less intense crimes, I guess you could say. Like they could be tried as adults for carjacking. We saw that often. They could be tried as adults for first-degree assault. And that was the one where I think we saw was abused most by prosecutors, because young people, if they got into a fight and they happened to have like a knife in their pocket, even if they didn't pull the knife, the police officer probably would charge them with first degree assault, because there's a bias in the criminal justice system to overcharge, because you know that a judge is probably going to knock back some of those charges. But in the case of a 16 or 17-year-old, when you're charged as an adult, you're automatically in the adult system. So even if a judge kicks back the charge to second degree assault or even third degree assault, that is still going to be on the young person's record because they were charged initially as an adult. So basically what we saw, what you see a lot in, all across the United States, is paying for crimes in like an over criminalized criminal justice system that we have. And it's really hard. It's really hard to get over that. And when you have something on your record that flags on your record, I mean, I was just talking to someone that I went to college with who had a noise violation on his record and wasn't able to start a job in the gig economy when he lost his job due to coronavirus. And we see that in Baltimore all the time. I mean, these kids who make this mistake at 16 or 17 years old, whether they get into a fight or whether they do something a bit more serious, like try to steal a car, that is going to be on their record forever, unless they can go through a lengthy legal process of getting it expunged, which, I mean, they don't even have the resources to own a suit, much less have the resources to know that they can get their, record expunged. So when we're talking about something that is really going to prevent these young people from, whether it's going to school, whether it's getting a job, whether it's, actually making good money to pay for kids or to, just to live, just to eat, I think it's really in our best interest to make sure that these 16 and 17 and especially 14 and 15-year-olds are being given a chance to really go to the juvenile justice system, where they're still going to learn, they're still going to be, and in some ways they're even held to a higher standard than in the adult criminal justice system, because young people in the juvenile justice system, they really have to follow a strict schedule, they have to go to school, and in the adult justice system, they're literally sitting in jail like playing cards, So I think it's really in our best interest, both for the young people's development in jail and after they get out, to not have it on their record, and to remain in the juvenile justice system.
So when prosecutors are prosecuting, let's say, a 16-year-old that's done something, is there some kind of incentive for them to, like you said, make it as severe as possible, or ask for the most severe charge because they know that the judge will diminish it somehow? So they basically try to anchor it in a more severe place.
Yeah. So exactly. Like basically it's pretty rare in our system, in our criminal justice system at all, even for cases to even go before a judge. Like I think I read a statistic where like overall in the United States, like 3% of court cases actually go before a judge, and 97% of court cases, criminal cases, I guess would be a better way to say it, are just handled with a plea agreement. Like the person just pleads guilty and then they take the charge and then they go home or they go to jail, whatever the plea agreement is. So because of that system, because of plea agreements, we have prosecutors and police officers that are charging as to the fullest extent of the law, was the way we put it, because in a plea agreement, it's going to be knocked down so that the young person pleads guilty or innocent, or however they decide to work that. So basically, and that's not just in Maryland, that's in the entire United States. Like we incentivize our prosecutors to charge as heavy as they can, because when the young person or when the, defendant pleads down, then that, the prosecutor doesn't want to start with a meager charge and then have no punishment at all.
The nonprofit you worked for, how effective did you feel that it was in accomplishing its objective?
Such a good question. Well, I will say we were a nonprofit of only 8 people. So when you have these really big, lofty goals, there aren't really the resources to accomplish those goals, it is very difficult to actually feel like you're accomplishing anything, because with a staff of only 8 people, there is just, and I'm an optimist, I'm an idealist. Like I want to accomplish what I set out to accomplish. I refuse to settle for anything less than that. But, yeah, so I would say it was pretty discouraging to not really see and accomplish like what we were really trying to do all the time. I think we didn't really have a lot of the support that we needed from our board organization. Like our board of directors could have been more supportive. And I think that we sort of lacked a real strategy to be able to move forward with, a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. Like these are going to be our benchmarks and our metrics of success. So I learned so much. It was such a wonderful experience. But I think the nonprofit world in Baltimore in general we're really held back by a lack of really strategic thought about this is what we can accomplish, this is what we're going to accomplish, and this is what we have accomplished. I think when you try and take on so much and you don't have a really clear and concise and honestly limited mission and vision for what you want to accomplish, you're not going to be able to do it, and you're not going to be able to keep your staff or keep your kids. In our case, we're working with kids. We couldn't keep them encouraged if we can't let them know exactly what they're going to be doing, within this limited time frame.
And did you get a sense that people let their ideals get in the way of playing the quote unquote game?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we all were very idealistic, but there just wasn't enough accountability, I think, for holding the staff, honestly, because the people that I worked with, we all ranged from like 23. Actually, no, there was someone who was younger. It was like 21 to 27. And so when you're working with really talented, bright idealists in their early to mid 20s, it's going to be really difficult without a person who's really holding them accountable, really holding them to the fire, like, this is what I want you to do. Like, this is what I expect out of you. And that's because everyone was idealistic. Like we were all just trying to accomplish the vision that we saw, the vision that we wanted to accomplish, without really thinking about, longer term goals and strategies. So I think we really would have benefited from, holding our feet to the fire, of like, this is what I expect out of you.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that could have come in the form of more, just either seniority or more like ruthlessly strategically minded people? Like, how do you think that could have been added to your nonprofit?
Yeah, I think we probably could have used a bit more like ruthlessness. Like, um, I know we're going to talk in a little bit about switching over to corporate, but when you compare it to a corporate environment, and when you compare what I did at the nonprofit versus what I did in a more corporate environment, like I was pushed. I was just pushed. And I think that because nonprofit people tend to be very loving and very, very big hearted and very vision oriented, some of the details and the logistics of management of, this is what I expect out of you, and if you don't do it, then I'm going to have to let you go. You feel that in a corporate environment in a way that you don't feel it in a nonprofit. Like, every day in corporate that your job is sort of on the line, and a nonprofit, or at least in the nonprofit environment that I was in, it can be a bit more like, oh, like we're all friends, we're all working together, like we're all like doing this. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some people operate really well in that environment. But I do think that if you're going to accomplish what you set out to accomplish, there has to be, stricter management, almost, ruthlessness,
I love it. So if you had a magic wand and could change Baltimore for the better, after how long have you lived there now?
It'll be 3 years in August, so 2.5 years.
And for a while you were in the inner city, and then you moved?
Yeah, so I definitely worked in the inner city. The nonprofit was based right on the University of Maryland campus, which I guess isn't quite inner city, but it's right next to West Baltimore. And, people know about West Baltimore from The Wire, and it's a real thing. It's pretty, there's a lot of poverty. And I lived fairly close to Johns Hopkins Hospital, which is more it's not in a great area of East Baltimore. And then I moved to Southeast Baltimore, which is very nice. So yeah, I lived in a couple of different places, but.
So you moved around the city?
Yeah.
And so I think that you got a good sense of the city, and that from our conversations, it sounds like a troubled city relatively. Mm-hmm. If you could wave a wand and change something about that city, what would it be?
I think the biggest problem facing Baltimore is, and this is probably going to betray some of my political views, but I really believe that the government stands in the way of like small businesses. Like, I think it is so difficult to open a business there. And that's true of large businesses coming in too. I mean, they had millions of dollars of incentives to get Amazon to build HQ2 in Baltimore, and they didn't do it because there's so many burdensome regulations on the development of large and small businesses. I talked to a brewery owner who opened a brewery in Pigtown, West Baltimore, which is like very, very pre-gentrification, like very early gentrification. And it took them 1.5 years to get a liquor license to open a thriving small business in Pigtown, West Baltimore. And I just feel like if you loosened those regulations in a way that would benefit especially African-American owned businesses to be able to open and thrive and bring people in, that would do so much for the crime rates, for the properties, for the schools, it would have such a cascading effect of benefits to people in Baltimore if they could just have fruitful employment that they were really proud of. I mean, like when you talk to these young people in this city, they all want to be a rapper. They all want to be a musician. They all want to be, a basketball player. Because for them, it's literally more realistic to go and be in the NBA than it is to make a living for themselves, a fruitful living for themselves in that city. And I think that tells you a lot. Like, I think that there's a culture in Baltimore where people don't believe in entrepreneurship. They don't believe that they can, go out and make it for themselves. And if you've told all these people for decades that they can't do it, that they'll never be able to get there, or, we'll slap, a year and a half worth of regulations on a business that you try and open. I mean, you've killed the American spirit, I think, in that city. And so I think, that's what I really wish Baltimore would do, is just expand their small business atmosphere, environment.
Do you know what those regulations are? Like, what on earth could take a city a year and a half to grant a liquor license?
Liquor license is actually a great example in Baltimore, because the state actually controls every liquor license that comes out. Like, it's all controlled by the comptroller, which is a position that I think you actually vote for that person. But there is a set number of liquor licenses that can be in each city, and they've all been taken in Baltimore, as in every other county. Like the state doesn't grant new liquor licenses. So in order for a liquor license to be released, one of the existing bars or liquor stores has to give up that license in order for it to then go into the lottery. So there's fewer licenses available than there are for people who want them. And when a person leaves, like if I owned a bar and I decided to no longer own the bar, like I wanted to sell it, that liquor license is also tied to the building. So then there's another process that you have to go through in order to release the liquor license from the building in order to have it enter into the lottery. So it's like, and plus breweries are even a whole other special type of liquor license. Like, it's like a whole thing, and it's all very bureaucratic. It's all very intimidating. And like I said earlier, like, we're talking about young people. In the case of young people, we're talking about young people who've never been taught professionalism. They don't even show up to work on time most of the time, because they are carrying with them so many traumas and burdens from their own past. So how do you expect a young person to be able to go through that process? Like, if they wanted to open any other kind of store, it doesn't even have to be like a bar or whatever. Like, it could be like a clothing store or a CD store or whatever, like there's regulations that are literally insurmountable for where these young people or even adults are coming from.
I think that's a really reasonable answer.
So, Sarah, you leave the nonprofit, and some would argue the next move may be a smaller for-profit, but you went big for profit. Tell me about your rationalization, the transitioning from one to the other.
Yeah, sure. So, my resume makes absolutely no sense. But so I really do have kind of a math sort of oriented mind. I mean, you wouldn't know it, because in college I was a history major and a Russian studies double major. So you would expect that math or data analysis or anything would really scare me, but I really enjoy it. Like, I really have kind of a numbers brain. I'm good at Microsoft Excel, and I sort of had the opportunity when the nonprofit sort of fell apart, to go join a really large multinational bank, because a roommate of mine was a recruiter there. So it was not like a cute way that I was able to get in. I was, I knew someone there. But it did allow me to really expand my skill set in terms of data analysis, and, obviously very focused on margins, and on, large, I was working on a team that was dealing with billions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities every single day. So when you're in charge of that kind of data, then you are, I think, showing that you have, a mindset that is capable of being able to manage that for a large multinational bank. And that was important to me. I was kind of in a place where I was sort of, my views were changing a bit politically. I knew that I wanted to do something more in the corporate sphere. And so this was just a really, really amazing opportunity to be able to, show that I have more of a data-driven analytical mindset.
You talked a little bit about some of the differences between the corporate environment and the nonprofit. Nonprofits tend to have bigger hearts. They tend to be idealistic, where corporate world tends to push a little bit harder on their employees. Certainly, there's more pragmatism typically in larger companies. Certainly more results oriented, it sounds like. What are some of the other differences that you appreciated in the corporate world and maybe didn't appreciate?
Yeah, I think, in both spheres, actually, I found that there was a lot of strategy. Like we were at the nonprofit, I was always strategizing on, how are we going to get this bill through the legislation? Like, how are we going to convince these delegates and senators to listen to us? Like, how are we going to convince our young people to say the right things, et cetera, et cetera. But nonprofits are strategic in a way that for-profits, I think, have really mastered a strategy. I mean, the bank that I was working for has like hundreds of thousands of employees, like all around the world. And yet we all knew exactly what we were going to come in and do every single day in order to accomplish the mission of whatever team we were on. And I think that sort of granularity in just your expectations as an employee can be missing in the nonprofit world. I mean, I would come in the morning at the nonprofit and, not necessarily know. And that's sort of a symptom of the nonprofit that I was at, where I was, I was entrusted with a lot of responsibilities, but not a lot of, granular, this is what you need to do every single day. And, I didn't have as much responsibility at the bank that I was at, but I felt like I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I think that having that kind of structure, having that sort of almost rigidity in like, this person does this and this person does this and this team does this, is helpful for really accomplishing your goal at the end of the day, which, for the bank, of course, is to make money.
Yes, banks tend to care a lot about the cash flow.
Yeah, definitely.
So I understand that you spent a semester canvassing for a Democrat while you were in college. And then after college, and you decided to leave what arguably was a comfortable job in the corporate world to go work for a Republican in Ohio.
That is right.
Tell us about that wonderful 4-year transition.
Yeah. Like I said, my resume makes no sense to me, especially. So I grew up in a very conservative house. My dad is, or was, he's retired now. But my dad was a founding member at an engineering firm, and definitely has a very like small business, like deregulation, like all the sort of things that I was talking about with Baltimore. I really that's sort of grounded in my dad. He's a very rational sort of small business kind of Republican. And my mom is a bit more like soft-hearted like me. So she grew up in a Democratic family, really believes in the American dream. She's like very values oriented in that way. And when I went to college, I sort of, history majors, it's funny actually. History professors are actually considered they actually are statistically the most liberal professors of any discipline. And I think that I was sort of in this point in my life where I couldn't really reconcile like how to be, a very like small business kind of Republican like my dad, and also be very values driven and big hearted like my mom, like without being a Democrat. So I also was kind of at a place in my life where I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be appreciated. And I wanted, I went to a school, William and Mary, which is a pretty liberal school, liberal arts school for sure. And I found that people liked me more when I didn't say I was conservative. So it's funny. It's like being in your low 20s, like, or your upper teens even, and being on a college campus, it takes a lot of strength of self to go against the flow. And I just don't think that I really had that strength of self, nor do I really think that I was interested at that point in my life in pursuing what my political ideology really was. So I ended up becoming really good friends with this guy who I also totally had a crush on. was not good. And he convinced me to intern for Monty Mason, who was running for the Virginia House of Delegates in Williamsburg. He was running in that district. So I interned for Ben for like a month. And then his boss was a field director who was like, and at this point I was it was the summer between my junior and senior year, and my field director, Ben's field director at that point, was like, you are so good at this. Like, you were built for politics. Like, you need to be a field organizer. So I moved to Newport News, which is right north of Williamsburg, and canvassed there, was a field organizer there from August until the election in November. And he, like, Tyler is most political people are like very persuasive, like very people oriented. And he told me over and over again that, like, I know you never wanted to do politics, because I didn't. I wanted to do international aid at like a nonprofit in DC. He was like, I know you never thought about politics before, but I'm telling you, like, you were built for it. You need to do Hillary's campaign. So I agreed. I was going to go do Hillary's campaign in literally December. I think it was started at the end of November in Iowa. And I like wasn't really sure that I wanted to do it, but Tyler had convinced me that this is what you need to do. And 2 days before I was supposed to get in the car from Virginia Beach and drive to Iowa in the dead of winter, I couldn't get out of bed. I just could not get out of bed that morning. And I really think that it was the Lord was like, you really should not do this. Because can you imagine if I had done it, like, that's it, you know, like, you don't get to change your political views, at least for like 10 years, if you know, go be an organizer on a presidential race. Like, that's it. Like, that is your resume. And then, of course, huge shocker to me then, especially, like, Hillary ended up losing, and I would have been really out of a job. So, because that's what most people do. They join a campaign and then they go, like, work in the presidential policy or whatever. So, over the years, especially after I moved to Baltimore, I really started to see kind of what my dad meant when he was talking about, we need less regulation and we need more, you know, small businesses, and, you know, the government just gets in everybody's way. And he sounds like a grumpy conservative, which is how I'd always thought of him, until I actually saw the results of what happens when you have a huge government apparatus kind of sitting on top of this city. It sort of crushes the entrepreneurial life out of it. And I really was convinced sort of that if we reframe the messaging of the Republican Party to be more like, we are promoting people working at jobs that they love, not jobs that they have to go to every day and only, you know, make some pittance for it. But if we're promoting an entrepreneurial spirit, I mean, we will just set people loose into what they actually want to accomplish. And so that's how I sort of made my transition back into being sort of, you know, I'm more libertarian conservative, I would say. And that's how I ended up getting involved with Young Americans for Liberty. And they send out canvassers essentially for mostly Republicans. Libertarians are like their dream, but, you know, their Libertarian Party isn't a real, you know, powerhouse or anything. So I canvassed for a Republican in Ohio in March, and then Thomas Massey for U.S. Congress. I did some work for him too before we all got sent home for coronavirus.
So you came by your current political views very honestly, right? You went down a path and you were critically thinking throughout. And so I really appreciate that. A lot of folks in their mid to late 20s are following what the crowd is doing, or they're following what their parents think they should do. But you've come to a very independent, honest place in your political views, and you answered that question beautifully.
Thank you.
So obviously your plans, your trajectory has been changed by COVID-19, the pandemic here. So before the pandemic was recognized as a pandemic, what were your plans? And then now that the pandemic is upon us, what do you think your plans will shift to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I should also mention, next month I'll graduate with my master's degree in political management through
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a 2-year program. For me, you can do it on campus. For me, it was all online because I didn't live in DC at the time that I started. So my goal was to work somehow in conservative politics. I think my dream job is to work in political polling. I love the sort of intersection of political data and political strategy, because really, when you're talking about independent, kind of small polling organizations, they are working directly with the campaign, and they're finding out by surveying people in the district, surveying those people, like, what do you care about? Like, what do you think about your opponent if we tell you X, Y, and Z? Like, what do you think about the person that we're working for if we tell you X, Y, and Z? So in so doing, they are really crafting the strategy for this political campaign. And I am so drawn to that because it's like you're measuring quantitatively, you're measuring public opinion in order to really be the architect of political campaigns. So that's my dream job. I did actually apply for, I applied for a job there at one of these polling firms. And then coronavirus has sort of delayed that. They haven't told me no, which seems like a good sign, but they haven't told me yes because we're all on lockdown. So the goal is, to really utilize my degree in 2020. Hopefully we have an election and I'll be able to actually utilize that degree at something like that.
So does campaign strategists become political strategists once the person's in office, and then you repeat every election cycle?
Yeah. So basically, pollsters specifically are more like campaign consultants. Like, they work from, campaign to campaign to campaign. Like, and Virginia is cool because Virginia has a political campaign every single year, because if it's not a governor's race or a national race, then we even have, state senator and delegates races. So even those, smaller races will still hire pollsters. But for like, if you like, I don't know, for someone, if you're working on a political campaign for like Donald Trump or Joe Biden, then you will probably become a political strategist after that person leaves. But if you're more of a campaign consultant, that's what you do. Like, you just get hired by these campaigns like every single year, which I'm more drawn to because I love politics for what it is. Like, I think politics and political campaigns are so much fun. I think there's so much energy, and I'm less drawn to policy, which is like the implementation of sort of what, you're trying to accomplish, which is funny because most people who I talk to, like when I was on both political campaigns, all political campaigns, they are really doing it because they want to get into the policy. Like, I am really passionate about X, Y, and Z. Like, I'm really passionate about strategy. I'm really passionate about getting to know people and talking to people and persuading people. So I love the sort of political machination more so than the policy implementation.
When you say you love politics over policy, you love figuring out the machine and how to make it work and how to influence it? Or do you love, because politics, I think, can become toxic if it's all you're about is, it's like a battle and we have to win no matter how and all that stuff. Yeah. So is it more about just figuring out the puzzle in the game?
Yeah, I think politics does have a really ugly connotation in our society, which I think is sad, because what politics really is just convincing people and persuading people that what your person, or you as a person, if you're the candidate, is trying to do is going to ultimately benefit the community at the end of the day. And I think that our politics has become very, very toxic in a way that's really dangerous. And people are more apt to talk about what the opponent is going to do that's going to be so harmful and so terrible. And they talk about that more than what they're going to do is going to benefit the community. And I think that that's sad, because at the end of the day, politics is really about persuading people that you're the best man for the job or the best woman for the job. I think, for me, the reason I love it is the strategy. Like, I think it's really fun to be able to tap into what people really want to see. And I guess in some ways that makes me, I don't know, it makes me sound a little like not personable, like not a good person. But I think it's important to be able to talk about issues from different ways. I think criminal justice reform is a really great example, because you have Democrats that really care about criminal justice reform because they are horrified at the disparities between minority and white Americans and how minority Americans are so much more likely to be imprisoned. And what Democrats really care about are racial disparities. For one example, of course, they care about a lot more than that, but that's one example. Libertarians are really concerned about the size of government and about how government is not a positive force. That's what they believe, that government's not a positive force, and the criminal justice system is an extension of overwrought government power. So if you take criminal justice reform and you're trying to persuade you're trying to persuade candidate X, or you're trying to persuade voters to vote for candidate X on the basis of criminal justice reform, you can persuade both Democrats and libertarians to vote for the same candidate if you talk about criminal justice reform in a different way to each of those candidates. And that kind of like strategic mindset, I think, is so cool. Like, I think that's awesome. And I think we're not doing enough of it as a country. I think that Republican candidates talk to Republicans and Democratic candidates talk to Democrats. And as people have become more hyper-polarized over the last, I'd say probably 10 to 20 years, then you lose that ability to talk about the same issue with different people in a different way. And I think that's really dangerous, because if you don't see that Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump care about the same things just in a different way, you're going to demonize whoever doesn't affiliate with your partisan, title.
So it's not politics like digging up dirt and deciding when you should leak it to the press and trying to undercut your opponent. It's more politics like communicating, especially across diverse ideological beliefs.
Right.
And making it so that you're kind of trying to unify people and steer the ship, even though people are all different.
Yeah. Politics is, I just wrote my capstone actually for my master's degree, was all about messaging, because I think political parties, and political candidates are really losing a lot of respect in this country because of the way that they're choosing to message themselves. It's like the Republican Party has become synonymous with the anti-left party or the anti-Democrat party. In a lot of ways, the Democratic Party has done the same thing. Like, progressives are anti-Trump or anti-conservative or whatever. And I think that when you do that, it's tempting because it's probably going to win you more elections, because when people are mad, then they want to go out and vote against that other guy. But a short-term win isn't necessarily a long-term gain. And I think if we let ourselves in politics become so much against the other side, we are losing the unification of our country. Whereas if we choose to message our political parties as aspirational and optimistic, that's what the greats did. Like, Ronald Reagan was super aspirational about his faith in American virtue. He was so optimistic about his faith in the American people. And Barack Obama was the same way. He was very optimistic about hope and change can come to America, and it's right here, right now. These are people who turned out millions of people who had never voted before. And by the way, Ronald Reagan won 61% of the youth vote. The youth vote. This is a Republican. So we are too afraid, I think, as conservatives, we're too afraid to talk to young people or to Black people or to Latino people, because we don't want to get in there and talk about the issues and go where we haven't gone before. And I think that is really dangerous for us politically. We can't write people off. We just have to figure out how to message to them about what they care about.
Right. I'm going to switch tacks to your volunteering and your outpouring. Specifically, you went on a trip once to New Mexico, I think it was, to work with victims of human trafficking. And you talked to me on the phone about it, and it just seemed transformative. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that really was transformative. It was in Phoenix, Arizona, so you're close, but yeah, Phoenix.
I'll edit that out.
So when I was 23, I went to Arizona. I had kind of come off like a really tough time in my personal life. I was like I didn't really know who I was. I had been, I felt like I had sort of lost myself. And I had recently started going back to church, and I really wanted to do something that mattered. I wasn't really working in a place that I felt like I was really doing something that mattered. So I signed up to go on a mission trip. And what I ended up doing was working with a team of about 7 other women, and we were working with girls who were in a group home. And basically a group home is sort of synonymous with an orphanage in the United States. Like, these are young girls between the ages of like, I think 11 and 17, who had been victims of trafficking, human trafficking, or they were at very high risk of human trafficking due to living in, an abusive home or abusive community, or any number of risk factors. But Phoenix is really a hotbed for human trafficking because it's a real hub. It's a sports hub. It's right near the border. There are a lot of there's a lot of like commercial, because it's sort of on the west-ish coast. So there's a lot of trade and cargo that comes in. So you just have a lot of people moving around, and that puts girls at risk because it's really easy for a trucker to drive in, hire a quote unquote prostitute who happens to be 15, and take off with her, across the border to Texas or whatever. So, what we were doing was working with these girls, just sort of honestly just hanging out with them. Like, we went hiking in Sedona, which was amazing. We went whitewater rafting. We went rock climbing, like all these activities that were intended to sort of rebuild trust, because these girls had, through their experiences, lost faith in adults. Like, they had lost faith in the ability of adults to take care of them. They thought they were so much older than they actually were. And so like, just being able to like see them play and hang out and talk and laugh is a form of healing, because these girls had been treated for years like 30-year-old women, and they aren't. They're girls, they're teenagers. So it was really transformative to me. I felt like I really had a purpose just in being like, an effervescent, enthusiastic kind of person. Like, that was really put to good use, working with, 20 teenagers for a week.
It's crazy to think about human trafficking as a whole kind of world that exists underneath the public consciousness. I know that it's really big here in Virginia too. I think 81 specifically is considered one of like the main arteries of human trafficking. Mm-hmm. So is this an issue that you want to, I guess, incorporate into your life of service and volunteering?
Yeah, I care a lot about teenagers in particular. I am also I give on a monthly basis, not a whole lot, but like less than $20, but I give it every month to the Dave Thomas Center for foster. I think it's foster and adoption. And they work specifically with older kids to, hopefully, ideally, transition them out of the foster system and to actually get them adopted. And it's really difficult because like most people who want to adopt, they want to adopt young kids. Like, they want to adopt babies. And as soon as a kid is like maybe 8, 9, 10, like the chances that they get adopted goes way down. And I think that was sort of born, my like passion for that and my heart for older kids is sort of born out of 2 places. It's born out of my experience with the girls in Arizona, because they don't have anyone. And when you don't have anyone who really cares about you as, a teenager, you're going through a formative stage in your life feeling alone. And that's just in my thought processes, it's just not going to set you up into a positive path. when you get to be, 18, and then what you do really can have some pretty significant consequences. And I'm also really pro-life. And I think it's really important that if you are pro-life, if you're against abortion, you really need to put your money where your mouth is in terms of adoption, foster and adoption, because the reality is the majority of babies that are aborted every year, every day even, are usually from a minority community, and those communities don't have the resources to care for these kids. And so if you're going to be against abortion, then you have to also really put your money where your mouth is when it comes to adoption and fostering, because the kids that I support through the Dave Thomas Center are probably not white usually, and I think that as conservatives, we need to be more honest about that and be more, cognizant of the fact that, what we say in terms of policy and what we believe in terms of policy has real world consequences. So put your money where your mouth is. Like care about kids who are being trafficked, like actually care about them, like actually do something about it, or care about kids who are in the foster care system, like do something about it, because it doesn't end with birth. It doesn't end with, I wasn't aborted, yay. Like it ends. Well, it never ends, but one place it ends is when you're 18. Like, what are you doing for those kids from the time that they're born to the time that they're 18?
Yeah, this is tangential to a really fundamental difference between conservative and liberal thought. It seems that a lot of liberals think problems in society should be solved by the government, and there should be governmental institutions and mechanisms in place to prevent bad things from happening and from people to be living in horrible situations, and that people should always have a chance at life. And the primary force behind that should be the government, making sure everybody has those chances. And then on the conservative side, I hear a lot of we should depend on the goodness of people's hearts and charities to fund and empower the causes and people that they care about. What do you think about that, the difference in paradigm?
Yeah, I think a lot of, just speaking honestly, like conservatives are much more likely to give to charity than Democrats are. Like I remember being shocked to hear that in 2019, Joe Biden gave like $400 to charity, like $400 total dollars to charity. Like I gave $400 to charity in 3 months in 2019. And that's not to brag. I tithe to my church. Like I give 10% of my income to my church, and I think that what you believe in terms of, is it government, is it charities, what you believe is going to formulate your actions. And I think that our world and our society and our country, and even down to our city, functions better when people care about each other. And a way that people care about each other is through charity. It's through sacrificing, because what you're really doing when you're tithing, whether it's to your church or to the Dave Thomas Center, you're sacrificing a portion of your income for the betterment of someone else. And those organizations, in my opinion, I am a conservative, in my opinion, those organizations use that money better than the government does. They don't spend it on bureaucracy. They have very low overhead. They have very low administrative costs. And you should investigate that, before you decide to give to a charity, because Save the Children is going to have a very different administrative overhead than the Dave Thomas Center or your local homeless shelter, and you can investigate that, because it's, they have to publish that information as 501c3s. The government doesn't really publish its bureaucratic overhead because it's too complicated. So I think that our money is better spent when it goes directly to those causes rather than going to the government to be then distributed out in a very, bureaucratic administrative way.
Mm-hmm. We're going to spring one on you here. This is a question we ask all our guests. So if you've been listening.
It's not a hard question, but it is a revealing question, right?
Okay.
Right. So if you've listened to any other episodes, great, you know what's coming. If you haven't, then buckle up. So let's say you're about 25 years old and you have no obligations. You're not married or financial obligations, and you have this choice. You can either go to a stand-up comedy club every week and deliver a bit that's 10 minutes for 6 months, and work on your bits between, or join the military and serve for 4 years, and you may or may not go overseas or be deployed. That's the choice. What do you pick?
So be a stand-up comic or join the military.
Exactly.
I think I'd probably join the military. Probably more as an analyst role. I think that, well, I mean, honestly, I'm very very selfish about it. Like, I want to be able to put that on my resume. Like, you get benefits. Like, when you actually can say that you're a protected veteran, like, that's awesome. And I am the wimpiest person. Like, I'm like pretty wimpy though. I like couldn't hold a gun or like fire, I couldn't do that. But I think it would be really cool to be more in an analyst role. Like, I thought about doing maybe the National Guard because I thought very briefly about it because they have, analyst roles where you can actually like be involved in the, policy sort of analysis, but you don't actually have to fight. So I would be attracted to that.
Dang, I feel like you almost snuck the question there a little bit, or ducked the question, because that seems to be neither. I don't know. That's not really military. It is military, but I don't know. I kind of think risking your life and going overseas and working out every day and grinding is military. Paul, you were in the National Guard, right?
Yeah, I was an infantry guy that was doing a lot of shooting of weapons and working out and that sort of thing. Yeah.
I love that, dude. So that's what I think of when I think of military.
But Sarah gets to answer the question however she wants to answer the question.
I know.
Fine answer.
She got us, dude. We're going to have to refine it.
Yeah, she found the loophole.
Yeah. I found the loophole.
Well, hang on. Let me ask, is it possible to enlist, like, let's say the National Guard and just in an analyst capacity?
I mean, you'd have to go through basic training, but yeah, after those, I think it's 8 weeks or 10 weeks now. After those few weeks, then yeah, you can become an analyst. Yeah.
Okay.
You have to be selected for it, but yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sure Sarah Wall would get selected. Okay. Yeah, that was a good answer. Nobody's brought up the resume piece yet. It seems like every time we ask somebody, there's something that we haven't heard yet. So yeah,
we get something new every time. I love this question for more.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a great question.
It's interesting. Out of the two hosts for this episode, one chose comedy and one chose military. I served in the military, so it's pretty obvious I was the guy who chose military.
Yeah.
Daniel chose comedy, and Sarah, you're gonna have to help me convince him to actually do the 6 months of stand-up.
Daniel, you'd be so good at it.
Had I known that Paul would never leave me alone, if after I said comedy, I would have definitely said military.
Why did you choose comedy over military?
I thought of it as a more grueling and more just masochistic endeavor than joining the military. And to me, the more suffering I put myself through, the stronger I'll be. Or at least that's whatever mode I was in at the time. So that's why I said it.
That's so interesting, because you would think that like the suffering would really come from, having to go through basic training, for example, and work out so hard every day and potentially be shipped overseas to like kill people,
Right. The military could certainly be more suffering than the stand-up, but stand-up, it taps into these fears I have of needing approval and all this psychological stuff that keeps me awake at night. And it would be a crucible to go through 6 months of just, especially most of the times I'd go up, I'd probably flop, So it would just be a time of building resilience. And I think I would come out of it mentally stronger. So that's why I was drawn to that answer.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's probably partially why I was drawn away from that answer. Because like it terrifies me, like the idea of having to get up there, because the audiences are really tough. So like being able to like stand up there and give even a 15 or 20 minute performance and have to suffer through them not laughing would be so like my worst nightmare.
Yeah. 6 months straight. Yeah. So, and I just figure, run toward the noise, run toward it. I can't remember what the quote is, but it's, if you hear something, run toward danger rather than away from it. I don't know.
That's
something
right.
like that.
I got you.
So that's That's I envisioned there's this story. It was a book about a Navy SEAL. It's called Fearless. I remember reading it, and it had such a profound impact on me because there's a scene in it when this dude, the Navy SEAL, is taking a bath at home, and his wife is at home, and it's late at night, and the front door opens, and somebody walks in, and he realizes that it's nobody that he knows, so it's an intruder. And the first thing this guy does is get up out of the bed and just sprint toward the front door, in the nude, yelling at the top of his lungs. And the guy split. The intruder just ran away. And I think to myself, would I react like that? If my family was on the line, would I just get out and run naked at the guy? He could have a gun. He could have a knife. And I've just been, I think about that sometimes. And one way to make me believe that I would actually get up out of the bathtub and run down the guy at the door would be going to stand-up comedy every week and try not to flop.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense.
That makes perfect sense. But I would think that the military would get you to do that more, considering this guy is a Navy SEAL.
That's true. Yeah. But I think that it's more of a mental choice. I guess the fact that he had a physical dominant presence. I mean, the dude was a big guy. He was probably jacked. So that would help. But I think it was more about the fearlessness of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, yeah.
Very cool. So, Sarah, you're about to finish your master's in political management, which is awesome. Do you have any more educational aspirations ahead of you?
Not at the moment. My dad always really wanted me to go to law school. But to me, like I mentioned before, like law is sort of akin to policy, and that's just not really what I want to do. So I guess if I were to think about going back to school, it'd probably be law school, but I think I'm done. Like, I think this is really where my heart is, and this is really what I want to do. So I don't think that I'll need to do any more school.
So campaign strategy and campaign polling, are you going to do that for the rest of your career? Or when you look back 20 years from now at how you spent the next 20 years, is there a ton of diversity, or are you really committed to campaign polling?
I would like to hope and believe that the diversity in my resume is going to end soon. I would really like to find exactly what I want to do and pick it and do it. And I think that polling is it. And, you can continue to grow in that field. Like you can, go up to being a partner at some of these firms, and I think right now that's sort of my goal. That's really what I want to do. Daniel and his friend are very convinced that I'm going to run for office one day, and I might do it. I don't know though. I mean, it seems like the people who, like, from my experience, the people who should run for office are the people who are not running for office. And I'm a political person. Like, I like the strategy. Like, I like the politics. And to me, in my idealistic mind, the people who should be running for office should not be political wonks. Like we've had a few governors in Virginia's history who are very, very political, and they're charming. And it just, to me, I want the people that run for office to be really down to earth, like very good people who really know the communities that they're coming from and really care about those communities. And I think if you're like me and you're really focused on political strategy and sort of the game and the machination and everything behind the scenes, you won't really have the interest to be really engaged in the policies and the people that you really, are serving, because you're a public servant. And so I don't know. I don't really see myself running for office. Maybe one day, but I think I like the strategy too much to run for office.
I think you can find yourself in a place where you feel really balanced amongst all of those aspects and be a great candidate. You certainly have the intellect. You certainly have the passion. And so, yeah, you should give it serious thought.
Sarah Wall, 2048.
Thanks, Daniel.
But I'll be dead by then, Daniel.
No, you won't, dude. Even if you do die, I'll just sit you up in the chair and put the microphone in front of you.
It'll be a 2-dimensional cutout or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get a picture of me when I'm like 25. So, Sarah, we had a blast. It's a bummer that we couldn't be in person. You're very engaging virtually, but we would love to have you back in person to do this again for sure.
That would be great.
So Daniel was really excited about having you on. He pumped you up, and you're everything he said you were going to be. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Paul and Daniel. It's really been such a pleasure.
You were just a ray of sunshine, Sarah, and it's always great talking to you, and I'm so glad you're able to come on.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe so you know when our episodes come out. Thanks for listening.